All right, I want to chat with you guys and gals for just a few minutes about the mind-muscle connection. And for me, it's really funny to talk about this because I used to make fun of this idea. Okay, I used to make fun of this idea. But you know what? I'm not a closed-minded person. I do like to follow what the evidence shows. You know, and bodybuilders talked about this for a long time. I always kind of dismissed it because I'm like, work done, muscle fiber recruitment, this is what matters, blah, blah, blah. This sounds like a bunch of hippie nonsense, a bunch of Frank Zane hippie stuff, okay? Just because of the way they termed it that way. But there is something to be said for the fact that when a lot of people have a lot of experience with something, particularly very successful people, it's not a good idea to dismiss something outright. Okay, it's one thing to dismiss it when the evidence is lacking and it's been looked at, right? If it sounds ridiculous, but when that many champions have used this term and they've talked about it and they've had success with this concept, and these are people who are winning, again, it is not wise to dismiss it. So I've kind of kept up with what the evidence has shown on this over the years, and lo and behold, because bodybuilders have had success with it, that means people are going to want to try to study it in the lab. You know, because we need to verify what's actually going on. Okay, so there's been a number of studies that's been done on it. I think one of the first ones I mentioned, oh gosh, I must have mentioned it about 7 or 8 years ago the first time, when they were looking at EMG studies and they were calling it internal versus external cueing. Okay, there we go. Now we've got nice scientific terms instead of mind-muscle connection. Well, that makes all the difference. We use a scientific term, we're good, right? No, but the joking aside, they described the internal cueing as mind-muscle connection. We want you to focus really hard on the muscle, and they didn't do it on isolation, they did it on compound movements. Internal cueing meant, so they did bench pressing, hooked up EMGs, they just had people train normally. They had people do mind-muscle connection for the pecs, and then they had them do it for the triceps, and then they had them do external cueing. Well, it produced some interesting results because this was something we could measure with electromagnetic activity showing at least nerve impulses. All right, see where we're going here? Lo and behold, when people focus really hard on contracting their chest on the bench press, what do you think the EMG read? More electromagnetic activities in the pecs. When they focus really hard on contracting the triceps on the bench press, what do you think happened? The EMG went up more on the triceps compared to the control group that just did normal rep tempos. Now, they also did external cueing where they moved as explosive and as hard as they could, and both the pecs and the triceps went up over the normal speed. But we expect that on concentric reps. Eccentric reps, that's not going to happen, right? The lowering of the weight, not so much. But on concentrics, we know faster concentrics can do some interesting stuff, as long as they're controlled. Meaning you don't want them so fast that the bar is flinging around. You know, you don't want to lose control of the bar. But when you have control of the bar and you explode with the weight as hard as possible, we do know that we'll get upper threshold muscle fibers quicker, okay? EMG shows good too, but what was interesting was that the individual muscles, instead of all the muscles, did respond more to this. All right. Well, now we're measuring something in the lab. We can't dismiss it as hippie, airy-fairy nonsense when we can measure the energy of it, okay? So, from that point, at least from a scientific perspective, we then had to say, there's something possibly to this. Again, you can't just dismiss it outright now. Not if you're a logically consistent and intelligent person, intellectually honest person. Well, there have been apparently later studies done that I've seen some researchers reference, and I have not dug deep into those studies, that showed that when mind-muscle connection was used, hypertrophy was improved, okay? Even in the case where if it made you fatigue a little quicker. So some people notice that on some of these curls I'm doing, because biceps and arms have historically been a very weak link for me. So I've really been focusing on bringing out my arms. I'm actually working on my arms and my pecs a lot right now. Not as much on things like my lats and all that stuff that's really dominant for me, posterior chain from all the years of powerlifting. Okay? So on those curls, when I train that way, which you see me doing here, yeah, same thing. I can't lift as much weight for as many reps. I fatigue quicker. But that's also what they found in the lab when people try to do this and they focus on that muscle. Sometimes you lose a little bit of performance, but what they found is, well, the hypertrophy can still be really, really good, even with that loss of performance. Why? Well, because it, as we know from the other stuff, it's simply recruiting more muscle fibers. So if we're recruiting muscle fibers more effectively and then fatiguing those muscle fibers, so we have to understand that. It's not just about activating, it's about creating enough fatigue in a muscle that your body then responds by making it grow. Okay? Because just activating it's not enough, or else all your endurance muscles just from jogging, endurance runners will have pretty dang big legs. They oftentimes don't. Unless they're doing a lot of heavy leg work and maybe got good leg genetics. So it's not enough to simply activate. We have to create fatigue in the muscle fibers. But if we're recruiting them more frequently through the set, getting to them sooner because we're focusing on that, then we end up recruiting them for more total reps. And again, we start talking about those deeper muscle fibers, the ones that really grow more and more as the more we get advanced. Because keep in mind, as you go up that rate coding chain, the more advanced you get as a lifter, the less the other muscle fibers are willing to grow. So ultimately, you're left, once you get quite advanced, the only stuff that's growing is the deeper fibers. The fastest switch fibers, that's the only ones that are really getting a lot of muscle growth. So if you're not fatiguing them, if you're not reaching them, because people say, well, they're reached on the 1 rep max. That's true. But it's only 1 rep, and it may not usually be sufficient, particularly for an advanced lifter. Nobody's getting big from doing a 1 rep max. Yeah, it's come in just squat, bench, and deadlift once a week really hard. All right? Nobody's getting big doing that. So it really is about creating that fatigue. So if it's allowing us to get a little higher quality sets, I think particularly when we're trying to isolate certain muscles a little bit more, we've got now both EMG data kind of showing how it works. We've got some hypertrophy studies kind of showing, yeah, it seems to work. Okay? And we've got decades of bodybuilders saying, well, I've done this and it seems to work. Okay, so we could look at that and say, yeah. Pretty reasonable concept, seems to work. Before we studied it, we didn't have real evidence other than the anecdote, but it's been looked at more and more. And so you've got the real world, decades of bodybuilders doing it. Now we're studying it in the lab and saying, yeah, it seems to help a little bit. It's not like a game changer, but it helps. And that's the key point. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.